their battle has to say, are his words dovish, a little bit softer on the economy, or are they hawkish? And he may leave the door open, but then may leave the door open for yet another rate hike to come the middle of December. Why? Because inflation is still high, and the Fed is still trying to bring it down to closer to 2.5%.
What do you think that means we're going to glean from his comments just generally about the state of the economy and for people at home to keep in mind?
He's going to tell us what we know, which is consumer spending remains strong, even though we're spending ourselves into record high credit card debt. The hiring market, the labor market remains strong. They've been trying to cool that down. And there's still a lot of borrowing going on out there, despite the fact that all these rate hikes have pushed that 30-year fixed rate up into about 8%, and pushed car loans up to about 7%, and APRs on credit cards, the medians are around 24%. Those are super high borrowing rates, but they have not slowed down spending or hiring.
As I'm sure you know, overnight Mariah Carey informed us the holiday season is upon us. Some people have already started
either holiday shopping. And what type of holiday season are we in store for? How is inflation going to factor in? We're expecting sales to go back to pre-pandemic levels, so we're going to see about a 5% bump from last year. The National Retail Federation estimating we'll spend around $800, $900 per person on average. Everyone's going to
mediator and indeed involves a plan that takes into account, seems to take into account only the needs of one country, namely Russia, seems to have a lot of chances for success.
Fine, thank you very much. I've been talking to a senior
Join the Night Riders
in Washington, D.C.
under the floodlights
And look at that draw. Thank you for talking
with
to me.
MotoGP in Cap.
Welcome.
Somewhere far out in the Atlantic, a reinforced American destroyer squadron out on patrol comes under fire. The first few shots are off target, but as American crews scramble to their battle stations, the fire becomes much more accurate. The USS Breckenridge takes a direct hit right on her bow, twisting metal and killing dozens of sailors. The high Atlantic waves pour into her from the giant hole left behind, and within minutes she begins to sink. In the distant horizon, the attackers are visible to U.S. Navy spotters. There's the telltale puff of multiple large caliber guns firing simultaneously on several of the enemy vessels. 28 seconds later, 30 1,500-pound shells smash into the American formation. The results are devastating, and hundreds more American lives are lost in seconds. The destroyers are all but helpless in the onslaught. Their 4-inch guns can't hope to match the massive range of the enemy battleships, and the only real hope they have is their torpedoes. But that means getting closer and braving heavy turn into their enemy, hoping to make use of their torpedoes. There's no air cover for the destroyer squadron. Most of America's carriers have long ago been sent to the bottom of the Atlantic, and those that survive are held in reserve in the Pacific, in a desperate last stand to hold the Japanese off the California coast. Likewise, most of America's battleships have long ago been lost to the major naval engagements of 1942 and 1943, overwhelmed by a superior enemy with better planes, ships, and guns, and more of all three of those. The U.S. Navy has been able to do little but put up enough of a fight to discourage an invasion of the homeland. Until now, as the destroyers steam toward their target, ships being lost one by one under the withering enemy fire, the full complement of the enemy formation at last comes into sight. Rows of battleships supported by several squadrons of destroyers, and at the rear aircraft carriers for establishing air dominance. Several spotter planes have been launched and have allowed the enemy to accurately direct the fire of the battleships low onto the Americans. But the carriers haven't even bothered to launch their torpedo planes. They don't need to. The last line of American defense in the Atlantic shatters and breaks in its suicidal attack. The joint British and German task force, protecting the largest invasion fleet ever assembled by mankind, continues on its path to the American East Coast. In the late 1930s, as Hitler began to ramp up his ambitions to create a new German Reich, it was clear he had one major problem. The United States. Taking on France and Britain would be difficult, though all of his advisors were confident neither nation was prepared for war and could be defeated. But if the United States were to once more throw its weight behind the Allies, as it had in World War I, then Hitler's dreams of conquering Europe could be at serious risk. Russia too would be problematic, but once his western flank was secure, shifting superior German firepower to the Russian front would be simple. Hitler's spies assured him that the Red Army was fundamentally weak. Stalin's great ideological purges and paranoia both have resulted in the extermination of many of the Red Army's best officers. What remained was a ragtag force of mostly conscripts, led by officers whose primary qualification wasn't battlefield experience, but rather loyalty to Stalin. The United States was the ultimate thorn in Hitler's side. Even if the nation remained neutral, Hitler's dream of German superpower only meant that it would eventually be put into competition with the U.S., a nation that German observers were quick to point out was well on its way to becoming the dominant industrial and economic power in the world. Despite the Great Depression having leveled the U.S. economy, the potential was nonetheless there. Its navy alone had grown by almost 100 ships by the time of Germany's invasion of Poland. It was obvious. Germany would either have to face America today or defer the conflict to a post-war era when it had consolidated power in Europe. However, postponing the conflict meant that the United States could continue to grow in power while Germany depleted itself in combat, potentially giving America an insurmountable lead. Better that the U.S. be dealt with now while Germany was still strong, but how exactly? First, American naval might would have to be neutralized, or at least heavily occupied. A modern industrial power protected on both sides by vast oceans, the United States enjoyed the best strategic position of any major nation in human history. It could easily engage in trade with both the European and Asian world, while being protected from both sides by the sheer size of the oceans at either coast. America knew this too, which is why in the 20th century it had begun a sizable investment in its navy, which now rivaled the legendary British Royal Navy in might. It had also worked to deter any European expansion of power into its hemisphere of the world. The United States would tolerate no threat based on the southern or northern spheres of American continents. The German Navy wasn't big enough to take on the Americans alone. Its Navy was more focused on controlling the Baltic Sea, and already faced incredible difficulty in doing so thanks to British and French navies. What was needed was an ally with a strong navy of its own, and Japan afforded just such an opportunity. If the United States could be distracted in the Pacific, not only might it be deterred from joining the European war, but when the time came to bring the fight to American shores, the U.S. would have to split its fleets between the Pacific and Atlantic. But Japan would never be able to support an actual invasion of the American homeland, which is what would be needed to truly neutralize the threat that the U.S. posed to German dreams of superpowerdom. It simply wouldn't be economic or realistic to ship German troops and equipment all the way to the Pacific, where it would be escorted to the American coast by Japanese ships. Instead, it had to be an Atlantic power that aided the German effort. And the only nation that had the naval might to challenge and destroy the American Navy, Great Britain. But how could Britain be persuaded to